and I'd like to welcome you all here today. We always need to give recognition to the fact that these events are made possible by the National Endowment for the Arts and for New Mexico Art, which we're not real sure what's happening with that funding. So if you're interested in giving us a donation, we would sure appreciate that. We have a donation jar back there. Then I would like to say a few words about our speakers, because this whole thing is about incredible women, and these are two incredible women. Dixie, I think there's a lot of people here who know Dixie. And we are incredibly grateful to Dixie for all that she's doing with the history of Mountain Air. I don't know anybody else who's done the kind of work that she's done. She's helped us put together a room over here called the Resource Center, which has all kinds of information in there. You need to go on the computer, because she's put most of it on the computer, but it's pretty incredible. Dixie also saves us all from fire every year. She spends half her year up on top of Capilla Peak. And she used to be a teacher here in the school, so she's been a really incredible part of this community. Donna Deiner has also been an incredible part of this community. She used to work with, who's the teacher's name?
Hines.
With Virginia Hines, who for almost 30 years had an incredible music program here. And Donna supported her in many, many ways. I know she helps with the Roadrunner Food Bank every month when that comes through, and she's responsible for the incredible gift shop that we have. She's very civic-minded and community-oriented. So these two women are pretty incredible in and of themselves. And we look forward to hearing about more incredible women.
I am really excited today to talk about the frontier women of Mountain Air and Torrance County. Donna and I have just found some wonderful information. And everything that we talk about today, the stories from Maud Metters, the journal of Mabel Sibley Jones, is in the resource room. And we're only going to read a portion of it. So if you want to know a little bit more, you can go ahead and go in there and read those. You know, I have been collecting stories, journals, photos, and other information my entire life on frontier women. I'd find a cool story about a woman and just stash it in a file somewhere. You know, I really always felt I was born 100 years too late, because most of my women heroines lived over a century ago. And you know, these women, they really weren't appreciated during their time. They really weren't. You know what really frustrates me is when I'm doing research and I find some woman's name, Mrs. John Evans. Well, what was her name? Who was she? You know, but it's really hard sometimes to find information on these women. And I want to thank, although she's been gone for a number of years now, I want to thank Dorothy Cole, because she's the one who collected all this stuff in the beginning, and she's the one who came to me one day and she says, Dixie, I have lung cancer and I'm not going to live much longer, and I need somebody to take this information. Will you take it? Well, of course I took it. And I've tried to put pictures around town. I've tried to use as much of her information as I can, because she told me, don't put it in a drawer somewhere. You know, what good is that going to do? And if I was to die, my husband or brother would probably throw it away. So I'm glad that I have it here. You know, Mountain Air has really had its share of frontier women also. And if you look on the handout that I gave you, I'll be talking about the women on this picture. You know, Eva Corbett, she started the first school in town, and it was in a dugout. Can you believe that? Josephine Beale was an early high school principal, and Lena Schaefer. If it hadn't been for Lena, we would not have the Schaefer Hotel today. And I truly believe that. She pushed Pop to build that Schaefer Hotel, and she did most of the work. By that time, he was wanting to go to Rancho Benito and do his artwork. And if it hadn't been for Lena, I don't think it would even be here. I don't know if any of you remember Cosita Otero. but she kept the accounting books for St. Alice's Church. She also collected the history. Oh, and she wanted to talk about it every time that you were around her. Trinidad Cisneros was known as the woman who supplied water to the railroad. She was also a really smart businesswoman ahead of her time. Now, how many of you remember Carmen Padilla? The old Carmen Padilla, not the young one. She was a beloved member of the community. And you know, when I grew up in this town, and I left for a lot of years and then I came back, but it was so sad that some of those people that I used to see on the streets were gone. They had died. You know, they weren't around anymore. And Carmen Padilla was wonderful. She was about this height. She was always happy, and she was always telling wonderful historical stories. Do you remember her, Lula?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. She was a great lady. She helped her husband, Paul, operate their small grocery store, which was about 2 blocks south of the post office. Later, she would open the El Charro Cafe. You know, during those years, Mount Nair had a community dance every Saturday night. Can you believe it? I wish we still did that. And Carmen would leave the El Charro Cafe open so people could come and they could eat after the dances. You know, and she converted a few rooms in the back of the store, and they rented to those in need. If they could not pay, she let them stay anyway. She was an exceptional midwife and herbalist. And I remember seeing her walking along the roads and the mountains and the highway looking for medicinal plants. And I stopped one time and I said, "Carmen, what are you looking for?" And she showed me, and it was really interesting, and it started a love of medicinal plants in me also. She delivered over 50 babies during her long career as a midwife. Maurice Lawson, have you heard of her? Maurice Lawson and Hazel Shockey, their picture should be there, started the only women's club in town, the Coronado Club. You know, women's clubs were popular during this era and did much to support the economy of the town. And Anne Ravenstone and Mary Schultz also pushed really hard for the MAC Center, to buy the MAC Center, get Sibley Art started. And they have a really thriving art colony here now because of what they've done. You know, Anne's a hard worker, and she's done a lot of things here. I don't know what we would do without her, really. You know, many times contributions of women are not talked about. And there are so many histories of women that have been lost over the years. Can you imagine all the stories that have been lost? And we just can't do that anymore. We can't lose any more of them. The women we will be discussing in the remainder of the lecture were all true pioneer women who overcame obstacles and loneliness to live in a new country. You know, many times they immigrated to a location they had never been before. A lot of times it was their husband's dream. It wasn't their dream. And they went with their husband. And I remember my grandmother telling me that she rode an immigrant train out here to Missouri. And she said she cried because they never got to go home. She didn't go back home for 5 years. We didn't have telephones back then. Took a little bit longer to write letters. We didn't have the internet. And she said it was just easier to stay here and go and visit. It hurt so bad. That's what she told me. Now, information for Lucinda Kayser and Mabel Sibley Jones, which Donna will be doing, are in their own words from diaries and journals they left behind. And over the years, I want to point this out, there has been a lot written about Maud Metters and her capture by Pancho Villa. And as with the interpretation of any historical event, there have been conflicting stories about her experience. And some of them were not true. To be as accurate as possible, I took information from an article written by her son, John E. Wright. And that article is also in the resource room. He wrote this article back in the Torrance County Citizen in 1981. And I believe that's exactly what happened. Now to get on to our lecture. Another woman important to the history of Torrance County and the Mount Air area was Lucinda Kayser. How many of you have heard the Kayser name? I don't see any Kaysers out here today, unfortunately. We didn't invite them. She is the wife of early pioneer August Kayser. And she holds the distinction of being the last woman to travel the old Santa Fe Trail. Now Donna will tell you a little bit about Lucinda Kayser. Is that okay right there?
Good afternoon. Lucinda and her new husband, Carl Trioff, and his daughter, Emma, decided to move to La Jolla in New Mexico territory to operate a mercantile store and a wagon yard in 1877. For most of their journey, they followed westward the tracks of various railroad lines, including the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe. Within 3 years of their trip in 1880, the AT and SF heralded the end of the Santa Fe Trail by completing the tracks to Santa Fe. A few months prior to embarking on the Santa Fe Trail, Lucinda married a German immigrant named Carl Trioff. He was a widower with a daughter named Emma, who was about 10 years old at the time their trip began. Little is known about Lucinda's life before her trip from Kansas to New Mexico. She was born in Kalamazoo, Michigan in 1856 and moved with her family to northeastern Kansas, near Manhattan, at an early age. She attended school and did become a school teacher. After Lucinda and Carl established their home in La Jolla, they would have a son that they named Frederick. Unfortunately, in 1884, Carl became ill and passed away, leaving Lucinda to raise the children and operate 2 businesses. I can't tell you how hard it was for her. She ended up writing to John Becker, who was a banker and mercantile owner from Berlin, for help. He sent one of his most trusted employees, August Kayser, to help the young widow. Well, I can tell you that August Kayser and Lucinda fell in love. They married in Socorro in 1886 and soon began having their own family. The couple moved to what would later become Eastview, a small community in the foothills of the Manzano Mountains. August went into the sawmill business. August and Lucinda taught school in the small villages of the area, including Manzano, Tajique, Chilile, and Punta de Agua. They had a total of 7 children. Lucinda passed away at the family homestead in Eastview in 1929. She was 73 years of age. She still has many descendants from both marriages who continue to live in the area. Lucinda kept a diary of their adventures on the old Santa Fe Trail from July through August of 1877. July 3, 1877. We started out from home at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I cried most of the way to Manhattan. We did stop there for about an hour and a half and then drove 2 miles and camped. I prepared supper, they ate, and went to bed. I had such a headache. Really did not eat anything. July 4th at 12 o'clock, we sat down to eat under the wagon on a buffalo robe. Well, that was quite the thing. We could hear the guns going off at Fort Riley. I believe that they actually shot guns off 20 rounds. We started on again at 3 o'clock in the afternoon and drove to the fort. They have so many fine buildings there. It's finally situated on a hilltop with a splendid view of the entire surrounding countryside. Carl had a deadline to meet on when he had to pay for the wagon yard and the mercantile store down in New Mexico territory. So he decided that he had to leave Emma and me alone for a very long week. He needed to travel faster than the three of us could in a wagon. There was no other way that he could make that deadline. The parting was so sad. Now, I do understand why he had to leave us in this strange and desolate place. But I have never felt so alone in my whole life. What if something happens to Emma? What if something happens to Carl while he's out there traveling all those miles alone? I knew I had to be strong, but it did not feel that way inside. August 5 arose quite late. Emma made the fire while I prepared Carl's food and his clothes for his journey. He had to borrow a horse from a friend. The parting was so sad. Carl looked right at me. "Don't you cry, girl." He did not want Emma to see me cry. Well, I did try not to cry, but I looked at Emma. There were tears in my eyes as I waved goodbye to him. August 17, I looked for Carl all day, but did not find him. Went to bed, cried again. The next day, I started watching again, and this time was not disappointed. For in the afternoon, I saw a horseman up by the post office. And as he came nearer, I realized it was Carl. Oh, my heart. Emma danced with delight. She was ecstatic. Had it not been for dignity's sake, I might have done the same. Carl was exhausted. He was tired, worn out by the time he reached us. He traveled nearly all day and night, having been on the road 4 days. It was around 200 miles, and that poor horse he borrowed nearly gave out. While Carl was gone, I had tried not to think about all the terrible things that could happen, from accidents on the trail to Apache or Indian raids. I was so worried about him. I had heard stories all my life about husbands and brothers going on a hunting trip or loading up on supplies, never returning home. Wow. I cried a lot worrying about Carl and was relieved to see him coming up to us, happy to see him riding towards the house. Well, in 1916, Maud Wright, her husband Ed, and their ranch hand Frank were taken captive on their ranch near Pearson, Mexico, by none other than Pancho Villa. Maud was forced to leave her young son Johnny behind with Mrs. Marino, a strong woman who worked for the Wrights. She took care of Johnny the whole time and would not release him to anyone other than Maud. Dixie will now present a first-person presentation of Maud Meadows.
Before I start my presentation, I want to welcome Maud Meadows' daughter, granddaughter, and great-grandchildren who are attending this today. Thank you so much for being here. Hello, my name is Maud Hawk Wright Meadows, but you can just call me Maud. After all these years, it still hurts to talk about my tragic experience. In 1916, when I was taken captive by Pancho Villa and his Villistas and forced to go on a 9-day march to Columbus and the American border. The pain of losing my first husband has never really left me, and it is still hard to talk about the experience south of the border. Shortly after getting married, my husband Ed and I moved to a location near Pearson, Mexico to homestead land. The Mexican government was encouraging Americans to settle in Mexico during this time. You know, we really did have a nice place, and we were prospering when Pancho Villa destroyed our lives. I met Ed back in Oklahoma when he worked as a sawyer for my dad, and I logged right alongside him and my 4 brothers. I was an outdoorsy woman. I liked horses, and I liked being outside, and my dad often told me I was a better hand than my brothers. Well, Ed and I got to know one another, and you know what happened? We fell in love. But my dad did not want to lose me as a logging hand and moved the family to Pinos Altos in New Mexico territory. I am sure he was hoping Ed would change his mind and decide I wasn't worth the effort. But Ed eventually caught up with us, and when my dad would not consent to the marriage, we eloped. It was exciting moving to Old Mexico into a homestead that Ed had already picked out for us. We rode horseback part way and staged the rest of the way to El Paso, Texas, where we were married in January of 1910. I loved ranching, and I took over the ranching home while Ed worked on getting his sawmill going and worked on some other activities. We worked really hard, and we were happy. And especially when we had our first son, that we hoped would be our first child, I still remember it like it was yesterday. Ed and our friend Frank had gone to Pearson to pick up supplies. It was late afternoon, and I was in the kitchen fixing supper when I heard horses. And I thought, oh good, they're back. But when I went to the door, there were 60 men in my yard. And I thought, oh my God, they're the ballistas. Pancho Villa has come to my ranch now. Shortly afterwards, Ed and Frank, with 2 loaded pack mules, rode up, and they were immediately surrounded by the ballistas and the supplies confiscated. And they led them to the barn. And I was thinking, no, they can't go to the barn. You know, I was really worried about this. I was really scared, and I was really heartbroken when I realized they planned for me to go with them. And they not only planned for me to go with them, they planned to leave my son behind. I had to leave my son. Can you imagine? Can you imagine leaving your only son in a situation like that? I didn't see Ed and Frank for the whole first day that we were out with Pancho Villa. And then I saw them. It was such a relief when I finally saw them the next day. They were both riding double on one horse with their hands tied behind their backs. Their horse came alongside mine just for a very few minutes. And Ed looked at me and he said, girl, they're going to kill me. I know they are. You're going to have to be strong. You're going to have to get back to the ranch somehow. And you're going to have to save Johnny. I love you, girl. I love you. Hang in there. Boy, that was about all I could take. They took Ed and Frank behind a rock. I heard gunshots, and then the horse came back with a little blood on the saddle without Ed and Frank. Oh, I wanted to run to that rock. I wanted to save him, but I couldn't. They stopped me. That was the last time I ever saw my husband. Villa's men led their horse behind a hill, as I said before, and they were killed. We soon met the main army. The ballistas pushed large herds of cattle in front of them. The cows were later killed, butchered, and cooked over open campfires. Villa needed lots of meat for his vast army. A good part of that meat was burned to a crisp on the outside and raw and bloody on the inside. I was given a piece of partially cooked meat and tie it to the back of my saddle, where it attracted hair, dirt, and flies as we headed north. I wasn't going to eat that meat. There was no way I was going to eat it, but I started getting a little lightheaded after a couple days, and I thought, oh my God, if I fall off my horse, they're probably going to shoot me, and I'm never going to make it back to save Johnny. So I gagged down small amounts of that bloody meat to keep up my strength. If I fell off my horse, I'm sure they'd probably shoot me. Every morning, every single morning, I thought I would be stood up in front of a firing squad. And every night, I wondered if I would be alive the next morning. When we stopped for rest a few days later, I finally got the chance to talk to Villa and to see what he had planned for me. He laughed at me, and he told me they were going to make a raid on Columbus. And if I was tough enough to live until we made it to the border, he'd let me go. I could tell he really didn't think I would survive that long. For most of the march, I was placed in the front line, I guess so they could keep track of me. As we neared the border, Villa made us march for over 10 hours with no food or drinks. I was hoping we would make it to the border and I could somehow escape and get back to my son. Around midnight on March 8th, we could see lights on the hills just west of Columbus. One of the officers approached me and told me he was giving me a rifle, and I was to ride up front and shoot at my countrymen. What? I have never been so insulted in my life. Shoot at my countrymen? I told him if he gave me that gun, he was the very first person I would shoot. And I wasn't sure if I could stop shooting. They killed my husband. They killed my friend. What have they done to my baby? I have no idea at this point. The soldiers were not paying much attention to me, as they prepared Columbus, and I tried to slip off in the darkness. But they told me to stay with the horse herd so I could comfort them when Villa's men came back. I could hear the shots. I could hear the shots from the ballistas as they charged into Columbus. And a little later, they returned fire from the soldiers stationed at the army base. I had to get away. There was a horse right there. Maybe I could just jump on it and ride off. Before long, we heard shouts and the sound of horses running toward us. I could tell from the looks on their faces that Villa had lost, and they were in retreat. Oh my God, this is it. They'll surely get rid of me now, and I will be executed just like my husband Ed. When I saw Villa, I walked right up to him and asked if he would let me go as he promised. He just merely waved me toward Columbus and told me to go. The ballistas gave me a mare that I recognized from our own herd. The mare had only been partially broke to ride and was nervous with all the activity. She wouldn't let me get on her. I tried and tried, couldn't get on her. And so I didn't want to draw attention to myself, so I just started leading her toward the border. At least I was finally free, and I could get back to the ranch somehow. I saw dust in the distance, and I was soon surrounded by American soldiers. I was so happy, but they all looked at me with suspicion. They accused me of being a spy for Pancho Villa. Can you believe it? Oh, I couldn't believe that. I would never be a spy for Pancho Villa. I would never have anything with that man after the way he treated me. But Colonel Slocum was a wonderful man, him and his wife, and he listened to me, and he believed me, and he helped me to find my son. I will never forget the kindness of the Slocums. Mrs. Slocum gave me her own clothes to wear and applied lotions and creams to my dry skin. She even insisted on riding the train with me, can you believe it, to Juarez, to meet Mrs. Marino and Johnny. Mrs. Marino. She took care of Johnny the whole time, and she stood up to those ballistas, and she would not give him to anybody but me. Mrs. Marino became a lifetime friend. I could never repay her for that. I should have known she would protect my son. The Colonel and Mrs. Slocum even gave me money for a train ticket to Silver City, where one of my brothers lived. 3 weeks later, I joined my parents where they were living in Safford, Arizona. Boy, it had been a painful journey, but at least Johnny had returned to the States with me. I married Will Metters a year later, and we moved to Mount Airy, where we raised cattle and pinto beans. We had 7 more children, and her last child is the one sitting right here. We lived out our lives together on this piece of land where our old house is still standing, and my descendants continue to live. One of Torrance County's first teachers was Mabel Sibley Jones. She accepted a position in a one-room schoolhouse in Tajique in 1890 and lived with local merchant Elisha Dow and his family. She only remained in Tajique for 1 year, but returned to her home state of Delaware, where she continued to teach and take care of her elderly parents. She never married. She left behind an interesting account of her experiences in the frontier town of Tajique, and yes, her whole journal is also in the resource room. Donna will now do a first-person rendition of Mabel Sibley Jones.
When I told Mama that I was going on an exciting adventure in New Mexico, she cried. She came up to me the day I was leaving and gave me her earrings and great-grandma's cameo. She wanted to make sure that I would never forget where I came from and that one day I would return. I rode the train from Wilmington, Delaware to Santa Fe, New Mexico to meet Elisha Dow, who had publicized for a teacher in a small village of Tajique. I thought it would be an interesting adventure, and I was very excited about this. I really had absolutely no idea what I was getting myself into. A girl from Delaware, out west now. I thought it was going to be great. Well, Elisha Dow and I spent 3 long days in a covered wagon, and 2 even longer nights en route to my road, to my new home in the Manzano Mountains. I saw a little of my new home the night we arrived, as it was really close to midnight, and we were ready to relax in a real bed, not on the ground with blankets. I was so excited. I got up early the next morning and went outside, and I learned and discovered that the town was constructed around a beautiful little plaza and had a population of somewhere around 500 people. A small stream nearby provided water for the community, and everyone took barrels in the morning to the stream for their daily use. Most of the homes had a small vessel in a corner room with a gourd for drinking. The laundry, I will tell you, was also done in the stream. Now, coming from Delaware, this was pretty primitive to me. But you know, it really suited the needs of these people, these frontier people, and this community. And you know what? I did learn to adapt. With the exception of Mr. and Mrs. Elisha Dow, Mr. and Mrs. John Dow, and a German immigrant named August Kayser and his wife Lucinda, all the people that lived in Tajique were New Mexico natives. I studied Mr. Dow. I found him very, very interesting. What I learned was how intelligent he was. He knew 7 languages. I didn't know anybody else that knew that many languages. I was surprised to hear the people praying one afternoon for rain. A statue of the Virgin Mary was being carried through the streets. She was carried into a home and set upon a resting place. Before the altar, prayers were offered, asking for blessings and protection of this home. In this section of the Manzanos, most of the inhabitants practiced the age-old rites of the Hermanos Penitente religion. I was surprised to learn that they felt it was very honorable to inflict pain upon one another, as well as themselves, because of the pain that Jesus Christ endured on the cross. Members of the group were brave enough to publicly display their desire for forgiveness of their sins. I found them to be a pious people, descendants of a religious cult that had its birth in centuries past in the old world. The death of a prominent penitente being announced in the village, I called upon the family. The body was carried by 4 men to the cemetery nearly half a mile distant. They were followed by a group of men, behind them the children, and lastly, the women. Later, on a bitter cold winter night, I witnessed a penitential ceremony over the same grave. It was midnight. I joined the women as I had before. The young boys were ahead of us, and leading the procession were members of the Pente Romanos gentlemen. We marched to the tune of the song, "Penitence, penitence, sin no more, unfortunate men." The shrill notes sounded by their tiny flutes were in a minor key, causing a frequent repetition to become monotonous and very, very eerie. We all carried lighted candles. The ceremony over the grave in that isolated cemetery was impressive and reverential. We reached home at about 2 o'clock in the morning. As with many cultured peoples, they too had their superstitions, as I was about to discover. I tried to visit all the families of my students, but often took someone along with me to interpret, as I still could not understand or speak Spanish that well. One afternoon, I decided to visit a family on my own, so that I would become more reliant in Spanish. I found the entire family at home, and they all seemed happy to see me. I was visiting with my student, Emilio, when his grandmother came in from the back of the house. She approached me. She took both my hands and spit upon them. Well, I was shocked. I was insulted and indignant, to say the least, and looked around quickly for somewhere to wash my hands. Well, Grandma then grabbed my hands again and dried them on the back of her skirt. I tried not to show my irritation, but could not understand why she would do something like this. Well, to tell you, I ran home. I ran back to Barbara Dow and explained this experience to her. Barbara laughed while explaining to me, the people here believe the devil will afflict that part of you that they admire. Well, I was still shocked. In order to avert the anger of the evil eye, they spit upon that part of you that they greatly admire. I have to tell you, I was still shocked. It is a compliment, Barbara explained, that they did not spit in your face. Well, from that time on, I wore a hat with a veil, and many times I also wore gloves. I enjoyed teaching these children. The schoolhouse was well built, and in the winter, a wood stove supplied ample heat. The lessons were in English, and the children were very attentive and obedient. At Christmas time, there was a Christmas tree and festive entertainment. A dance at one of the ranches brought people together. Some of them drove or rode horseback for at least 40 to 50 miles. Having any entertainment was extremely important to these people. In the horse and buggy days, the long, cold drive was safer done in the daylight. Over the prairie wandered antelope, wild horses, coyotes, cattle, sheep, and of course, the redundant prairie dog. As a consequence, the dances would begin at sunset, go all night, and end at sunrise. Food consisted mostly of meat, which was very plentiful. There was always at hand cattle, sheep, hogs, antelope, beans, chili, potatoes, onions, and bread would supplement the meat. And coffee was the beverage of the day. Butter was served probably every 6 months. They killed their own meats. Steaks and other portions were hung over the lines and dried hard in the air, and they called this jerked meat. In many homes, the bread was baked outside in an oven or an horno. If there was too much drinking by the men, dances would sometimes end very boisterously. Well, I tell you, at a dance in the schoolhouse, a young man was being put off the floor and left the building, only to return 20 minutes later with a companion. He sat right in front of me until he found a suitable opportunity to join the dancers. Well, once again, he was ousted from the dance, and a free-for-all fight ensued. As the fighters barred any exit from the only door, I sought escape from a window that had no sash weights and was being held open by 2 young girls from the prairie. Boy, did they laugh at me as I jumped through that window. It was 8 feet to the ground, and I didn't break anything. Well, I tell you, 10 minutes later, those same 2 young ladies jumped through the same window and ran off, as the dance had gotten too hot for them. Well, I've been here a year now, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. It was an amazing learning experience for a girl from Delaware. But my parents needed me. I had received a letter that it was time to come home. I will never forget this experience and what I learned from all of these people. It was good to have known them. They were fine people, and with every limitation, were trying to overcome adversities and build for themselves a home in the great and glorious country of New Mexico.
I would like to thank you all for joining us today. And does anyone have a comment or a question on anything that we've said today? Would you like to make a point? Or yes?
I just thought about those people being ancestors of like mine, and thinking about how it sounds funny the part where she was spit on for what was called buckle, and I just wanted to kind of say that it wasn't just in those times, but even as of when I was having children, still our ancestors were doing that.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was really a spiritual thing and very accepting of us as parents that our ancestors would do that to our children. And you know, just so many things have happened, that there's so many viruses and then this and that now coming, that, you know, so many things have changed, but it was a very spiritual and accepting thing for us as parents to accept that from our ancestors to our children.
That's very good. I enjoyed that. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else have anything to say or add to our thing? Yes, go
May
ahead.
I ask about that? How did that begin? How did that start?
I have no idea how far back it went, but it must have been as far as what were the years that she?
1890. 1890 is when she was there, yeah.
See, and I just know that it continued even as I had children in the 80s, that our ancestors were still doing that. And our family friends and people, but you know, it was always followed by a cross too.
Followed by
A cross. A crucifix on the forehead. And it was a blessing, is what it was. It was a blessing.
Very cool.
Ash Wednesday.
Anyone else? Okay, talking about Dorothy Cole again. Now, you have some papers in front of you, and you have the lyrics to a song that Dorothy wrote. And all I found was this song and some chords. And Joshua Orr, who is our music teacher here at the Mac Center, actually put the lyrics to music. I am so excited. And so you have those in front of you, and he's going to sing that for you now.
This was interesting.
The one thing wrong with this performance is that I'm not a woman. But, redeeming quality, the song was written by a woman, and my mother was a woman.
Was a woman. Oh.
2 for 3. They asked me to, play some music for this song, and so I kind of made it up. And I'm also going to kind of make it up as I go along. The song makes a lot more sense to me now after listening to your wonderful presentation. I had no idea what it was talking about while I've been practicing it. Now I do. And it exactly matches what you told about Mom. So.
Except for her rolling the smoke. She said that she rolling the smoke. Okay, maybe she did.
I thought about it. I could roll a smoke in 2 minutes while someone was making more stuff.
I asked him if he wanted.
That's up to you. Can you hear me right now?
Yes.
Okay. I found the oldest, most beat up guitar I could.
this room, step out our film on Pop Schaefer, and just visit with each other here at the end. And thank you so much. I appreciate it.